but a dozen piled on top of one another was a serious matter. Her speech was still somewhat windy, as it was hard for an entity with so little physical substance, hardly any ectoplasm, to enunciate clearly. But he could make it out. "Conference? There's nobody here but us," he objected. "Or do you mean he's on the pot?" Millie blushed as well as she was able to. Though as chambermaid she had been accustomed to the chore of collecting and emptying out the chamber pots, she felt that any reference to a person's actual performance on them was uncouth. It was as if the substance were completely divorced from the function. Perhaps she liked to believe that the refuse appeared magically overnight, untouched by human intestine. Magic fertilizer. "No." "Well, I'm sorry, but I'll have to interrupt him," Bink said. "You see, I don't recognize him as king, and I am about to depart the castle." "Oh!" She put one foggily formed hand to her vague face in feminine misgiving. "But see." "Very well." Bink followed her to the little chapel room adjacent to the library. It was actually an offshoot from the master bedroom, with no direct access to the library. But it had, as it turned out, a small window opening onto the library. Since the gloom of the unlit chapel was deeper than that of the other room, it was possible to see without being seen. Trent was not alone. Before him stood a woman of early middle age, still handsome, though the first flush of beauty had faded. Her hair was tied back and up in a functional, fairly severe bun, but there were smile lines around her mouth and eyes. And beside her was a boy, perhaps 10 years old, who bore a direct resemblance to the woman, and had to be her son. Neither person spoke, but their breathing and slight shifts of posture showed that they were alive and solid, not ghosts. How had they come here, and what was their business? Why hadn't Bink or Chameleon seen them enter? It was almost impossible to approach this castle unobserved. It was designed that way, to be readily defensible in case of attack. And the portcullis remained down, blocking off the front entry. Bink had been down by the kitchen entrance, fashioning his bombs. But granting that they obviously had come, why didn't they speak? Why didn't Trent speak? They all just looked at each other in eerie silence. This whole scene seemed to make no sense. Bink studied the odd, silent pair. They were vaguely reminiscent of the widow and son of Donald, the Shade, the ones he had told about the Silver Oak, so that they would not have to live in poverty anymore. The similarity was not in their physical appearance, for these were better-looking people who had obviously not suffered poverty. It was in their atmosphere of quiet loss. Had they lost their man too, and come to Trent for some kind of help? If so, they had chosen the wrong magician. Bink drew away, disliking the feeling of snooping. Even evil magicians deserved some privacy. He walked around to the hall and back to the top of the stairs. Millie, her warning completed, vanished. Apparently, it required some effort for the ghosts to manifest and speak intelligibly, and they had to recuperate in whatever vacuum they occupied when off duty. He resumed his march to the library, this time stepping heavily so as to make his approach audible. Trent would have to introduce him to the visitors. But only the magician was there as Bink pushed open the door. He was seated at the table, poring over another tome. He looked up as Bink entered. "Come for a good book, Bink?" he inquired. Bink lost his composure. "The people! What happened to them?" Trent frowned. "People, Bink?" "I saw them. A woman and a boy, right here," Bink faltered. "Look, I didn't mean to peek, but when Millie said you were in conference, I looked in from the chapel." Trent nodded. "Then you did see. I did not intend to burden you with my private problems." "Who are they? How did they get here? What did you do to them?" "They were my wife and son," Trent said gravely. "They died." Bink remembered the story the sailor had told of the evil magician's mundane family, killed by mundane illness. "But they were here. I saw them." "And seeing is believing," Trent sighed. "Bink, they were two roaches, transformed into the likeness of my loved ones. These were the only two people I ever loved or ever shall love. I miss them. I need them, if only to gaze on their likeness on occasion. When I lost them, there was nothing left for me in Mundania. He brought an embroidered Castle Rugna handkerchief to his face, and Bink was amazed to see that the evil magician's eyes were bright with tears. But Trent retained his control. However, this is not properly your concern, and I prefer not to discuss it. What is it that brings you here, Bink? Oh, yes. He was committed and had to follow through. Somehow the verve had gone out of it, but he proceeded. Chameleon and I are leaving Castle Rugna. The handsome brow wrinkled. Again? This time for real, Bink said, nettled. The zombies won't stop us. And you find it necessary to inform me? We already have our understanding about this, and I am sure I would become aware of your absence in due course. If you feared I would oppose it, it would have been to your advantage to depart without my knowledge. Bink did not smile. No, I feel it behooves me under our truce to inform you. Trent made a little wave of one hand. Very well. I will not claim I am glad to see you go. I have come to appreciate your qualities, as shown in the precision of your ethic that caused you to notify me of your present action. And Chameleon is a fine girl of like persuasion, and daily more pretty. I would much prefer to have you both on my side, but since this cannot be, I wish you every fortune elsewhere. Bink found this increasingly awkward. This is not exactly a social leave-taking. I'm sorry. He wished now that he hadn't observed Trent's wife and son, or learned their identities. Those had obviously been good people, undeserving of their fate, and Bink was wholly in sympathy with the magician's grief. The castle won't let us go voluntarily. We have to force it. So we have planted bombs and... Bombs? Trent exclaimed. Those are mundane artifacts. There are no bombs in Xanth, and shall be none. Never, while I am king. It seems there were bombs in the old days, Bink said doggedly. There's a cherry bomb tree in the yard. Each cherry explodes on impact, violently. Cherry bombs? Trent repeated. So, what have you done with the cherries? We have used them to mine the castle supports. If Rugna tries to stop us, we will destroy it. So it is better if it lets us go in peace. I needed to tell you, so you could disarm the bombs after we're gone. Why tell me this? Don't you oppose my designs and those of Castle Rugna? If magician and castle were destroyed, you would be the clean victor. Not clean. It's not the kind of victory I want, Bink said. Look, you could do so much good in Xanth if you only... But he knew it was useless. It simply was not the nature of an evil magician to devote himself to good. Here is a list of the bomb locations, he said, setting a piece of paper on the table. All you have to do is pick up the packages and bags very carefully and take them outside. Trent shook his head. I don't believe your bomb threat will work to effect your escape, Bink. The castle is not intelligent per se. It only reacts to certain stimuli. It might let Chameleon go, but not you. In its perception, you are a magician. Therefore, you must remain. You may have outthought Rugna, but it will not comprehend the full nature of your ploy. Thus, the zombies will balk you as before. Then we shall have to bomb it. Exactly. You will have to set off the cherries, and all of us will be destroyed together. No, we'll get outside first and heave a cherry back. If the castle cannot be bluffed, it can't be bluffed. It is not a thinking thing. It merely reacts. You will be forced to destroy it, and you know I can't permit that. I need Rugna. Now it was getting tough. Bink was ready. Chameleon will set off the bombs if you transform me, he said, feeling the chill of challenge. He didn't like this sort of power play, but had known it would come to this. If you interfere in any way, oh, I would not break the truce. But you can't break the truce. Either I rejoin Chameleon alone, or she heaves a cherry into a bomb. She's too stupid to do anything but follow directions. Listen to me, Bink. It is my given word that prevents me from breaking the truce, not your tactical preparations. I could transform you into a flea, and then transform a roach into your likeness, and send that likeness down to meet Chameleon. Once she set down the cherry, Bink's face reflected his chagrin. The evil magician could void the plan. Chameleon, stupid, would not catch on until too late. That nadir of intelligence worked against him as well as for him. I am not doing this, Trent said. I tell you about the possibility merely to demonstrate that I, too, have ethics. The end does not justify the means. I feel that you have allowed yourself to forget this temporarily, and if you will listen a moment, you will see your error and correct it. I cannot allow you to destroy this marvelous and historically significant edifice to no point. Already Bink was feeling guilty. Was he to be talked out of a course he knew was right? Surely you realize, the evil magician continued persuasively, that the entire area would erupt in vengeful wrath if you did this thing. You might be outside the castle, but you would remain in the Rubna environs, and you would die horribly. Chameleon, too. Chameleon, too. That hurt. That beautiful girl devoured by a tangle tree, ripped apart by zombies. It is a risk I must take, Bink said grimly, though he realized the magician was correct. The way they had been herded to this castle, there would be no escaping the savagery of the forest. Maybe you will be able to persuade the castle to let us go, rather than set off that chain of events. You are a stubborn one. Yes. At least hear me out first. If I cannot persuade you, then what must be, though I abhor it. Speak briefly. Bink was surprised at his own temerity, but he felt he was doing what he had to. If Trent tried to approach within 6 feet, Bink would take off to avoid transformation. He might be able to outrun the magician. But even so, he could not wait too long. He was afraid that Chameleon would tire of waiting and do something foolish. I really don't want to see you or Chameleon die, and of course I value my own survival, Trent said. While I love nobody alive today, you two have been as close to me as anyone. It is almost as if fate has decreed that like types must be banned from the conventional society of Xanth. We? Like types? Bink exclaimed indignantly. I apologize for an invidious comparison. We have been through a great deal together in a short time, and I think it is fair to say we have saved each other's lives on occasion. Perhaps it was to associate with your like that I really returned to Xanth. Maybe so, Bink said stiffly, suppressing the mixed feelings he was experiencing. But that does not justify your conquering Xanth and probably killing many entire families. Trent looked pained, but controlled himself. I do not pretend that it does, Bink. The mundane tragedy of my family was the stimulus, not the justification for my return. I had nothing remaining in Mundania worth living for, so naturally my orientation shifted to Xanth, my homeland. I would not try to harm Xanth. I hope to benefit it by opening it up to the contemporary reality before it is too late. Even if some deaths occur, this is a small price to pay for the eventual salvation of Xanth. You think Xanth won't survive unless you conquer it? Bink tried to put a sneer in his tone, but it didn't register very well. If only he had the verbal control and projection of the evil magician. Yes, actually, I do. Xanth is overdue for a new wave of colonization, and such a wave would benefit it as the prior ones did. The waves were murder and rapine and destruction, the curse of Xanth. Trent shook his head. Some were that, yes, but others were highly beneficial, such as the fourth wave, from which this castle dates. It was not the fact of the waves, but their mismanagement that made trouble. On the whole, they were essential to the progress of Xanth, but I don't expect you to believe that. Right now, I'm merely trying to persuade you to spare this castle and yourself. I'm not trying to convert you to my cause. Something about this interchange was troubling Bink increasingly. The evil magician seemed too mature, too reasonable, too knowledgeable, too committed. Trent was wrong. He had to be. Yet he spoke with such verisimilitude that Bink had difficulty pinpointing that wrongness. "Try to convert me," he said. "I'm glad you said that, Bink. I'd like you to know my logical rationale. Perhaps you can offer some positive critique." That sounded like a sophisticated intellectual ploy. Bink tried to perceive it as sarcasm, but he was sure it was not. He feared the magician was more intelligent than he, but he also knew what was right. "Maybe I can," he said guardedly. He felt as if he were walking into the wilderness, picking the most likely paths, yet being inevitably guided to the trap at the center. Castle Rugna, on the physical and intellectual levels. Rugna had lacked a voice for 800 years, but now it had one. Bink could no more fence with that voice than he could with a magician's keen sword, yet he had to try. My rationale is dual. Part of it relates to Mundania and part to Xanth. You see, despite certain lapses in ethics and politics, Mundania has progressed remarkably in the past few centuries, thanks to the numbers of people who have made discoveries and spread information. In many respects, it is a far more civilized region than Xanth. Unfortunately, the mundane's powers of combat have also progressed. This you will have to take on faith, for I have no way to prove it here. Mundania has weapons that are easily capable of eradicating all life in Xanth, regardless of the shield. "That's a lie," Bink exclaimed. "Nothing can penetrate the shield." "Except perhaps the three of us," Trent murmured. "But the main restriction of the shield is against living things. You could charge through the shield. Your body would penetrate it quite readily, but you would be dead when you got there." "Same thing." "Not the same thing, Bink. You see, there are big guns that throw missiles which are dead to begin with, such as powerful bombs, like your cherry bombs, but much worse, preset to explode on contact. Xanth is a small area compared to Mundania. If the mundanes were determined, they could saturate Xanth. In such an attack, even the shield stone would be destroyed. The people of Xanth can no longer afford to ignore the mundanes. There are too many Mundanians. We can't remain undiscovered forever. They can and will one day wipe us out, unless we establish relations now." Bink shook his head in disbelief and incomprehension, but Trent continued without rancor. "Now, the Xanth internal aspect is quite another matter. It poses no threat to Mundania since magic is not operative there. But it does pose an insidious but compelling threat to life as we know it in Xanth itself." "Xanth poses a threat to Xanth? This is nonsense on the face of it." Now Trent's smile was a bit patronizing. "I can see you would have trouble with the logic of recent Mundanian science." But he sobered before Bink could inquire about that. "No, I am being unfair to you. This internal threat of Xanth is something I learned just in the past few days from my researches in this library, and it is important. This aspect alone justifies the necessity of preserving this castle, for its accumulated ancient lore is vital to Xanth society." Bink remained dubious. "We've lived without this library for 8 centuries. We can live without it now." Ah, but the manner of that life. Trent shook his head as if perceiving something too vast to be expressed. He got up and moved to a shelf behind him. He took down a book and riffled carefully through its creaking old pages. He set it down before Bink, open. What is that picture? A dragon, Bink said promptly. Trent flipped a page. And this? A manticora. What was the point? The pictures were very nice, though they did not coincide precisely with contemporary creatures. The proportions and details were subtly wrong. And this? It was a picture of a human-headed quadruped, with hoofs, a horse's tail, and cat-like forelegs. A lamia. And this? A centaur. Look, we can admire pictures all day, but what do these creatures have in common? Trent asked. They have human heads or foreparts, except the dragon, though the one in this book has an almost human shortness of snout. Some have human intelligence, but exactly. Consider the sequence. Trace a dragon back through similar species, and it becomes increasingly man-like. Does that suggest anything to you? Just that some creatures are more man-like than others. But that's no threat to Xanth. Anyway, most of these pictures are out of date. The actual creatures don't look quite like that anymore. Did the centaurs teach you the theory of evolution? Oh, sure. That today's creatures are evolved from more primitive ones, selected for survival. Go back far enough, and you find a common ancestor. Right. But in Mundania, creatures like the lamia, manticora, and dragons never evolved. Of course not. They're magic. They evolved by magic selection. Only in Xanth can... Yes, obviously, Xanth creatures started from mundane ancestors. They have so many affinities. All right, they said impatiently. They descended from mundanes. What has that got to do with your conquering Xanth? According to conventional centaur history, man has been in Xanth only 1,000 years, Trent said. In that period, there have been 10 major waves of immigration from Mundania. 12, Fink said. That depends on how you count them. At any rate, this continued for 900 years until the shield cut off those migrations. Yes, there are many partially human forms that predate the supposed arrival of human beings. Does that seem to be significant? Bink was increasingly worried that Chameleon would foul up, or that the castle would figure out a way to neutralize the cherry bomb. He was not certain that Castle Runa could not think for itself. Was the evil magician stalling to make time for this? I'll give you one more minute to make your case. Then we're going regardless. How could partially human forms have evolved unless they had human ancestors? Convergence evolution doesn't create the unnatural mishmash monsters we have here. It creates creatures adapted to their ecological niches, and human features fit few niches. There had to have been people in Xanth many thousands of years ago. All right, Bink agreed. 30 seconds. These people must have interbred with animals to form the composites we know. The centaurs, manticoras, merfolk, harpies, and all. And the creatures crossbred among themselves, and the composites interbred with other composites, producing things like the chimera. Bink turned to go. I think your minute is up, he said. Then he froze. They what? A species mated with other species to create hybrids. Man-headed beasts, beast-headed men. Impossible. Men can only mate with men. I mean with women. It would be unnatural to... Xanth is an unnatural land. Magic makes remarkable things possible. Bink saw that logic defied emotion. But even if they did, he said with difficulty, that still doesn't justify your conquering Xanth. What's past is past. A change of government won't... I think this background does justify my assumption of power, Bink. Because the accelerated evolution and mutation produced by magic and interspecies miscegenation is changing Xanth. If we remain cut off from the mundane world, there will in time be no human beings left, only crossbreeds. Only the constant influx of pure stock in the last millennium has enabled man to maintain his type. And there really are not too many human beings here now. Our population is diminishing, not through famine, disease, or war, but through the attrition of cross-breeding. When a man mates with a harpy, the result is not a man-child. No! Bink cried, horrified. No one would breed with a filthy harpy. Filthy harpy, perhaps not. But how about a clean, pretty harpy? Trent inquired with a lift of his eyebrow. They aren't all alike, you know. We see only their outcasts, not their fresh young. No! Suppose he had drunk from a love spring, accidentally, and the next to drink there was a harpy. No, But Bink knew better. A love spell provided an overriding compulsion. He remembered his experience with the love spring by the chasm, from which he had almost drunk before seeing the griffin and the unicorn in their embrace. There had been a harpy there. Such reminiscence. Have you ever been tempted by an attractive mermaid or a lady centaur? Trent persisted. No! But an insidious memory picture of the elegant, firm mermaid breasts came to him. And Cherry the centaur, who had given him a lift during the first leg of his journey to see the magician Humphrey. When he touched her, had it really been accidental? She had threatened to drop him in a trench, but she hadn't been serious. She was a very nice filly, rather personal. Honesty compelled his reluctant direction. Maybe. And surely there were others, less scrupulous than you, Trent continued inexorably. They might indulge in certain circumstances, might they not? Just for variety. Don't the boys of your village hang around the centaur grounds on the sly, as they did in my day? Boys like Zink and Jamma and Potiphar, bullies and troublemakers, would cause ire in the centaur camp. Bink remembered that, too. He had missed the significance before. Of course, they had gone to see the bare-breasted centaur fillies, and if they caught one alone... Bink knew his face was red. What are you getting at? He demanded, trying to cover his embarrassment. Just this. Xanth must have had intercourse with... Softly a bad word. Must have had contact with Mundania long before the date of our earliest records. Before the waves. Because only in Mundania is the human species pure. From the time a man sets foot in Xanth, he begins to change. He develops magic, and his children develop more magic, until some of them become full-fledged magicians. And if they remain, they inevitably become magic themselves. Or their descendants do. Either by breaking down the natural barriers between species, or by evolving into imps, elves, goblins, giants, trolls. Did you get a good look at Humphrey? He's a gnome, Bink said without thinking. Then, oh no, he's a man, and a good one, but he's well along the route to something else. He's at the height of his magical powers now, but his children, if he ever has any, may be true gnomes. I dare say he knows this, which is why he won't marry. And consider Chameleon. She has no direct magic, because she has become magic. This is the way the entire human populace of Xanth will go, inevitably, unless there is a steady infusion of new blood from Mundania. The shield must come down. The magic creatures of Xanth must be permitted to migrate outside, freely, there to revert slowly and naturally to their original species. New animals must come in. But Bink found himself fumbling with the horrors of these concepts. If there was always an interchange before, what happened to the people who came thousands of years ago? Probably there was some obstruction for a while, cutting off migration. Xanth could have been a true island for 1,000 years or so, trapping the original prehistoric human settlers, so that they merged entirely with the existing forms and gave rise to the centaurs and other sports. It is happening again under the shield. Human beings must... Enough! Bink whispered, fundamentally shocked. I can't listen to any more. You will defuse the cherry bombs? Like a bolt of lightning, sanity returned. No! I'm taking Chameleon and leaving. Now! But you have to understand. No! The evil magician was beginning to make sense. If Bink listened anymore, he would be subverted, and Xanth would be lost. What you suggest is an abomination. It cannot be true. I cannot accept it. Trent sighed with seemingly genuine regret. Well, it was worth a try, though I did fear you would reject it. I still cannot permit you to destroy this castle. Bink braced himself to move, to get out of transformation range, 6 feet. Trent shook his head. No need to flee, Bink. I shall not break the truce. I could have done that when I showed you the pictures, but I value my given word. So I must compromise. If you will not join me, I shall have to join you. What? Bink, whose ears were almost closed to the evil magician's beguiling logic, was caught off guard. There, Castle Ruther. Defuse the bomb. I will see you safely clear of these environments. This was too easy. Your word? My word, Trent said softly. You can make the castle let us go? Yes. This is another facet of which I have learned in these archives. I have only to speak the proper words to it, and it will even facilitate our departure. Your word! Bink repeated suspiciously. So far, Trent had not broken it, yet what guarantee was there? No tricks, no sudden change of mind. My word of honor, Bink. What could he do? If the magician wanted to break the truce, he could transform Bink into a tadpole now, then sneak up on Chameleon and transform her. And Bink was inclined to trust him. All right. Go and defuse your bomb. I will settle with Rutna. Bink went. Chameleon met him with a glad little cry, and this time he was quite satisfied to accept her embrace. Trent has agreed to get us out of here, he told her.
Oh, Bink, I'm so glad,
she exclaimed, kissing him. He had to grab her hand to make sure she didn't drop the cherry bomb she still held. She was growing lovelier by the hour. Her personality was not changing much, except as her diminishing intelligence caused her to be less complex, less efficient. He liked that personality. And now he had to admit he liked her beauty, too. She was of Xanth. She was magic. She did not try to manipulate him for her private purposes. She was his type of girl. But he knew that her stupidity would turn him off, just as her ugliness during the other phase had. He could live with neither a lovely moron nor an ugly genius. She was attractive only right now, while her intelligence was fresh in his memory, apparent in its mechanism. The ghosts appeared to bid them all fond adieu. Chameleon cried at this parting, and even Bink felt sad. He knew how lonely it would be for the ghosts after these few days of living company, and he even respected the indomitable castle itself. It did what it had to do, much as Bink himself did. They carried bags of fruits from the garden and wore functional clothing from the castle closet, stored for 800 years without deterioration by means of the potent ancient cells. They looked like royalty, and felt like a too. Castle Ruther had taken good care of them. The gardens were magnificent. No storm erupted this time. No trees made threatening gestures. Instead, they moved their limbs to be touched gently in a gesture of parting friendship. No vicious animals appeared, and no zombies. In a surprisingly short time, they touched gently threatening magnificent Castle Ruther. They looked like royalty, and felt like it too. Castle Ruther had taken good care of them. The gardens were magnificent. No storm erupted this time. No trees made threatening gestures. Instead, they moved their limbs to be touched gently in a gesture of parting friendship. No vicious animals appeared, and no zombies. In a surprisingly short time, the castle was out of sight. We are now beyond Ruther's environment, Trent announced. We must resume full alertness, for there is no truce with a true wilderness. We? Bing asked. Aren't you going back to the castle? Not at this time, the magician said. Bing's suspicion was renewed. Just exactly what did you say to that castle? I said, I shall return as king. Ruka shall rule that again. And it believed that? Brent's gaze was tranquil. Why should it doubt the truth? I could hardly win the crowd while remaining confined in the wilderness. Bing did not respond. The evil magician had never said he'd given up his plot to conquer them, that's all. He had merely agreed to see Bing and Chameleon safely out of the town. He had done it. So now they were back where they had been, operating under a truce to get them all safely out of the remainder of the wilderness. After that, Bing's mind was blank. The untamed forest did not take long to make its presence felt. The trio cut through a small glade girt with pretty yellow flowers, and a swarm of bees rose up. Angrily they buzzed the three, not actually touching or stinging, but shearing off abruptly at short range. Chameleon sneezed, and sneezed again, violently. Then Bink sneezed too, and so did Trent. Sneeze bees! The magician exclaimed between paroxysms. Transform them! Bink cried.
I fucking love you, Mercy.
Facts.
I haven't played fucking Ash in so long too. That's just funny.
All the mercies.
I was maining the fuck out of Ash right before Overwatch 2 dropped. Haven't touched it really since. Someone's on point. Knew they had a fucking Sombra fucking chill, and I almost killed her when she fucking dipped out. Going right to point. On point. Come on. Point. No, she killed me. The baby D was the one that she killed me. My God, it gives me Ash again. That's literally one legit death. Ash again. Shit, boys and girls, all inclusive.
I claimed at herself where they outman didn't get and back to truce with the true wilderness. We? Bink asked. Aren't you going back to the castle? In good care of them. The gardens were magnificent. After these few days of living company, naturally to their original species. New animals must come in. If there were thousands of years ago, migration, the original gave rise to the human being isn't anymore. You will defuse the cherry bombs? Now. But you have to understand. No. The evil magician was beginning to be lost. What you suggest? Trent sighed with seemingly genuine regret. Well, it was worth a try, though I did fear you would reject it. I still cannot permit you to destroy this castle. Bink braced himself to move, to get out of transformation range, 6 feet. Trent shook his head. No need to flee, Bink. I shall not break the truce. I could have done that when I showed you the pictures, but I value my given word. So I must compromise. If you will not join me, I shall have to join you. What? Bink, whose ears were almost closed to the evil magician's beguiling logic, was caught off guard. Spare Castle Rupna. Defuse the bombs. I will see you safely clear of these environs. This was too easy. Your word? My word, Trent said solemnly. You can make the castle let us go? Yes. This is another facet of which I have learned in these archives. I have only to speak the proper words to it, and it will even facilitate our departure. Your word, Bink repeated suspiciously. So far, Trent had not broken it, yet what guarantee was there? No tricks, no sudden change of mind. My word of honor, Bink. What could he do? If the magician wanted to break the truce, he could transform Bink into a tadpole now, then sneak up on Chameleon and transform her. And Bink was inclined to trust him. All right. Go and defuse your bombs. I will settle with Rubna. Bink went. Chameleon met him with a glad little cry, and this time he was quite satisfied to accept her embrace. Trent has agreed to get us out of here, he told her. To accept her embrace. Trent has agreed to get us out of here, he told her.
Oh, Bink, I'm so glad,
she exclaimed, kissing him. He had to grab her hand to make sure she didn't drop the cherry bomb she still held. She was growing lovelier by the hour. Her personality was not changing much, except as her diminishing intelligence caused her to be less complex. She still held. She was growing lovelier by the hour. Dropped the cherry bomb she still held. He had to grab her hand to make sure she didn't drop the cherry bomb she still held, kissing him. He had to grab her.
Oh, Bink, I'm so glad.
Trent has agreed to get us out of here, quite satisfied. Chameleon met him with a glad little cry, and this time he was quite satisfied to accept her embrace. Trent has agreed to get us out of here, he told her.
Oh, Bink, I'm so glad,
she exclaimed, kissing him. He had to grab her hand to make sure she didn't drop the cherry bomb she still held. She was growing lovelier by the hour. Her personality was not changing much, except as her diminishing intelligence caused her to be less complex, less suspicious. He liked that personality. And now he had to admit he liked her beauty, too. She was of Xanth. She was magic. She did not try to manipulate him for her private purposes. She was his type of girl. But he knew that her stupidity would turn him off, just as her ugliness during the other phase had. He could live with neither a lovely moron nor an ugly genius. She was attractive only right now, while her intelligence was fresh in his memory and her beauty was manifest to his sight and touch. To believe otherwise would be folly. He drew away from her. We have to remove the bombs, carefully, he said. But what about the emotional bombs within him? Chapter 14, Wiggle. The three of them walked out of Castle Rubna without challenge. The portcullis was raised. Trent had found the hoisting winch, oiled it, and cranked it up with the aid of the magic inherent in its mechanism. The ghosts appeared to bid them all fond adieu. Chameleon cried at this parting, and even Bink felt sad. He knew how lonely it would be for the ghosts after these few days of living company, and he even respected the indomitable castle itself. It did what it had to do, much as Bink himself did. They carried bags of fruits from the garden and wore functional clothing from the castle closets, stored for 800 years without deterioration by means of the potent ancient spells. They looked like royalty, and felt like it too. Castle Rubna had taken good care of them. The gardens were magnificent. No storm erupted this time. No trees made threatening gestures. Instead, they moved their limbs to be touched gently in the gesture of parting friendship. No vicious animals appeared, and no zombies. In a surprisingly short time, the castle was out of sight. We are now beyond Rubna's environs, Trent announced. We must resume full alertness, for there is no truce with the true wilderness. We? Bink asked. Aren't you going back to the castle? Not at this time, the magician said. Bink's suspicion was renewed. Just exactly what did you say to that castle? I said, I shall return as king. Rubna shall rule Xanth again. And it believed that? Trent's gaze was tranquil. Why should it doubt the truth? I could hardly win the crown while remaining confined in the wilderness. Bink did not respond. The evil magician had never said he'd given up his plot to conquer Xanth, after all. He had merely agreed to see Bink and Chameleon safely out of the castle. He had done this. So now they were back where they had been, operating under a truce to get them all safely out of the remainder of the wilderness. After that, Bink's mind was blank. The untamed forest did not take long to make its presence felt. The trio cut through a small glade girt with pretty yellow flowers, and a swarm of bees rose up. Angrily they buzzed at the three, not actually touching or stinging, but shearing off abruptly at short range. Chameleon sneezed, and sneezed again, violently. Then Bink sneezed too, and so did Trent. "Sneeze bees!" the magician exclaimed between paroxysms. "Transform them!" Bink cried. "I can't! Achoo! Focus on them. My eyes are watering so. Achoo! Anyway, they are innocent creatures of the, achoo!
Run, you dolts!
Chameleon cried. They ran. As they cleared the glade, the bees left off and the sneezes stopped. "Good thing they weren't choke bees," the magician said, wiping his flowing eyes. Bink agreed. A sneeze or two was okay, but a dozen piled on top of one another was a serious matter. There had hardly been time to breathe. Their noise had alerted others in the jungle. That was always the background threat here. There was a bellow and the sound of big paws striking the ground. All too soon, a huge, fire-snorting dragon hove into view. It charged right through the sneeze glade, but the bees left it strictly alone. They knew better than to provoke any fire sneezes that would burn up their flowers. "Change it! Change it!" Chameleon cried as the dragon oriented on her. Dragons seemed to have a special taste for the fairest maidens. "Can't," Trent muttered. "By the time it gets within 6 feet, its fire will have scorched us all into roasts. It's got a 20-foot blowtorch."
You aren't much help,
she complained. "Transform me!" Bink cried with sudden inspiration. "Good idea." Abruptly, Bink was a sphinx. He retained his own head, but he had the body of a bull, wings of an eagle, and legs of a lion. And he was huge. He towered over the dragon. "I had no idea sphinxes grew this big," he boomed. "Sorry, I forgot again," Trent said. "I was thinking of the legendary sphinx in Mundania."
but the mundanes don't have magic.
"This one must have wandered out from Xanth a long time ago. For thousands of years it has been stone, petrified."
Petrified? What could scare a sphinx that size?
Chameleon wondered, peering up at Bink's monstrous face. But there was business to attend to. "Begone, beastie!" Bink thundered. The dragon was slow to adapt to the situation. It shot a jet of orange flame at Bink, scorching his feathers. The blast didn't hurt, but it was annoying. Bink reached out with one lion's paw and swiped at the dragon. It was a mere ripple of effort, but the creature was thrown sideways into a tree. A shower of rock nuts dropped on it from the angry tree. The dragon gave a single yelp of pain, doused its fire, and fled. Bink circled around carefully, hoping he hadn't stepped on anyone. "Why didn't we think of this before?" he bellowed. "I can give you a ride right to the edge of the jungle. No one will recognize us, and no creature will bother us." He squatted as low as possible, and Chameleon and Trent climbed up his tail to his back. Bink moved forward with a slow stride that was nevertheless faster than any man could run. They were on their way. But not for long. Chameleon, bouncing around on the Sphinx's horny-skinned back, decided she had to go to the bathroom. There was nothing to do but let her go. Bink hunched down so she could slide safely to the ground. Trent took advantage of the break to stretch his legs. He walked around to Bink's huge face. "I'd transform you back, but it's really better to stick with the form until finished with it," he said. "I really have no concrete evidence that frequent transformations are harmful to the recipient, but it seems best not to gamble at this time. Since the Sphinx is an intelligent life form, you aren't suffering intellectually. No, I'm okay, Bink agreed. Better than ever, in fact. Can you guess this riddle? What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 in the evening? I shall not answer, Trent said, looking startled. In all the legends I've heard, some sphinxes committed suicide when the correct answers to their riddles were given. Those were the smaller type of sphinx, a different species. But I seem to have muddled the distinction somewhat, and would not care to gamble on the absence of affinity. No, Bink said, chagrined. I guess the riddle was from the mind of the Sphinx, not me. I'm sure all sphinxes had a common ancestor, though I don't know the difference between one kind and another.
Odd. Not about your ignorance of mundane legends, about your riddle memory. You are the Sphinx. I didn't move your mind into an existing body, for the original creatures have all been dead or petrified for millennia. I transformed you into a similar monster, a Bink Sphinx. But if you actually have Sphinx memories, true Sphinx memories, there must be ramifications of your magic you don't comprehend, Bink said. I wish I understood the real nature of magic, any magic. Yes, it is a mystery. Magic exists in Xanth, nowhere else. Why? What is its mechanism? Why does Xanth seem to be adjacent to any mundane land in geography, language, and culture? How is this magic, in all its multiple levels, transmitted from the geographic region to the inhabitants? I have pondered that, Bink said. I thought perhaps some radiation from the rock or nutritional value of the soil. When I am king, I shall initiate a study program to determine the true story of Xanth's uniqueness. When Trent was king, the project was certainly worthwhile, in fact fascinating, but not at that price. For a moment, Bink was tempted. With the merest swipe of his mighty forepaw, he could squash the evil magician flat, ending the threat forever. No. Even if Trent were not really his friend, Bink could not violate the truce that way. Besides, he didn't want to remain a monster all his life, physically or morally. The lady is taking her sweet time, Trent muttered. Bink moved his ponderous head, searching for Chameleon. She's usually very quick about that sort of thing. She doesn't like being alone. Then he thought of something else. Unless she went looking for her spell, you know, to make her normal. She left Xanth in an effort to nullify her magic, and now that she's stuck back in Xanth, she wants some kind of counter-magic. She's not very bright right now, and... Trent stroked his chin. This is the jungle. I don't want to violate her privacy, but maybe we'd better check for her. Well, I guess you can stand one more transformation, Trent decided. I'll make you a bloodhound. That's a mundane animal, a kind of dog, very good at sniffing out a trail. If you run into her doing something private, well, you'll only be an animal, not a human voyeur. Abruptly, Bink was a keen-nosed, floppy-eared, loose-faced creature, smell-oriented. He could pick up the lingering odor of anything, he was sure of that. He had never before realized how overwhelmingly important the sense of smell was. Strange that he had ever depended on any lesser sense. Trent concealed their supplies in a mock tangle tree and faced about. Very well, Bink. Let's sniff her out. Bink understood him well enough, but could not reply, as this was not a speaking form of animal. Chameleon's trail was so obvious, it was a wonder Trent himself couldn't smell it. Bink put his nose to the ground. How natural that the head be placed so close to the primary source of information, instead of raised foolishly high, as in Trent's case, and moved forward competently. The route led around behind a bush and on into the wilderness. She had been lured away. In her present low ebb of intelligence, almost anything would fool her. Yet, There was no consistent odor of any animal or plant she might have followed. That suggested magic. Worried, Bink woofed and sniffed on, the magician following. A magic lure was almost certainly trouble. But her trace did not lead into a tangle tree or guck-tooth swamp or the lair of a wyvern. It wove intricately between these obvious hazards, bearing generally south into the deepest jungle. Something obviously had led her, guiding her safely past all threats. But what, and where, and why? Bink knew the essence, if not the detail. Some will-o'-the-wisp spell had beckoned her, tempting her ever forward, always just a little out of reach. Perhaps it had seemed to offer some elixir, some enchantment to make her normal, and so she had followed. It would lead her into untracked wilderness, where she would be lost, and leave her there. She would not survive long. Bink hesitated. He had not lost the trail. That could never happen. There was something else. "What is it, Bink?" Trent inquired. "I know she was following the ignis fatuus, but since we are close on her trail, we should be able to—" He broke off, becoming aware of the other thing. It was a shuddering in the ground, as of some massive object striking it, an object weighing many tons. Trent looked around. "I can't see it, Bink. Can you smell it?" Bink was silent. The wind was wrong. He could not smell whatever was making that sound from this distance. "Want me to transform you into something more powerful?" Trent asked. "I'm not sure I like this situation. First the swamp gas, now this strange pursuit." If Bink changed, he would no longer be able to sniff out Chameleon's trail. He remained silent. "Very well, Bink, but stay close by me. I can transform you into a creature to meet any emergency, but you have to be within range. I believe we're walking into extreme danger, or having it walk up on us." And he touched his sword. They moved on, but the shuddering grew bolder, becoming a measured thumping, as of some ponderous animal. Yet they saw nothing. Now it was directly behind them, and gaining. "I think we'd better hide," Trent said grimly. "Discretion is said to be the better part of valor." Good idea. They circled a harmless beer barrel tree and watched silently. The thumping became loud, extremely loud. The whole tree shook with the force of the measured vibrations. Tramp, tramp, tramp. Small branches fell off the tree, and a leak sprang in the trunk. A thin jet of beer formed, splashing down under Bink's sensitive nose. He recoiled. Even in the human state, he had never been partial to that particular beverage. He peered around the trunk, yet there was nothing. Then, at last, something became visible. A branch crashed off a spike-spire tree, splintering. Bushes waved violently aside. A section of earth subsided. More beer jetted from developing cracks in the trunk of their hiding place, filling the air with its malty fragrance. Still, nothing tangible could be seen. "It's invisible," Trent whispered, wiping beer off one hand. "An invisible giant." Invisible? That meant Trent couldn't transform it. He had to see what he enchanted. Together, silently, steeped in intensifying beer fumes, they watched the giant pass. Monstrous human footprints appeared, each 10 feet long, sinking inches deep into the forest soil. Tramp! And the trees jumped and shuddered and shed their fruits and leaves and branches. Tramp! And an ice cream bush disappeared, becoming a mere patina of flavor discoloration on the flat surface of the depression. Tramp! And a tangle tree hugged its tentacles about itself, frightened. Tramp! And a fallen trunk splintered across the 5-foot width of the giant's print. A stench washed stretched outward suffocatingly, like that of a stench puffer or an overflowing outhouse in the heat of summer. Bink's keen nose hurt. "I am not a cowardly man," Trent murmured, "but I begin to feel fear. When neither spell nor sword can touch an enemy." His nose twitched. His body odor alone is deadly. He must have feasted on rotten blivets for breakfast. Bink didn't recognize that food. If that was the kind of fruit mundane trees formed, he didn't want any. Bink became aware that his own hackles were erect. He had heard of such a monster, but taken it as a joke, an invisible, but not unsmellable, giant. "If he is in proportion," Trent remarked, "that giant is some 60 feet tall. That would be impossible in Mundania for purely physical reasons, square cube law and such. But here, who can say nay to magic? He's looking over much of the forest, not through it." He paused, considering. He evidently was not following us. Where is he going? Wherever Chameleon went, Bink thought. He growled. "Right, Bink. We'd better track her down quickly, before she gets stepped on." They moved on, following what was now a well-trodden trail. Where the huge prints crossed Chameleon's traces, the scent of the giant was overlaid, so heavy that Bink's refined nose rebelled. He skirted the prints and picked up Chameleon's much milder scent on the far side. Now a whistling descended from right angles to the path they were following. Bink looked up nervously and saw a griffin angling carefully down between the trees. Trent whipped out his sword and backed toward the black bole of an oil barrel tree, facing the monster. Bink, in no condition to fight it, bared his teeth and backed toward the same protection. He was glad it wasn't a dragon. One really good tongue of fire could set off the tree explosively and wipe them all out. As it was, the overhanging branches would interfere with the monster's flight, forcing it to do combat on the ground. Still a chancy business, but it restricted the battle zone to 2 dimensions, which was a net advantage for Bink and Trent. Maybe if Bink distracted it, Trent could get safely within range to transform it. The griffin settled to earth, folding its extensive glossy wings. Its coiled lion's tail twitched